Hi everyone, welcome to this new spooky episode.
That's too much.
Hi everyone, welcome to this new spooky episode of You Gotta Act, a podcast about actors and acting and spookiness. For the spooky episode, we have a spooky special guest in the shape of my sister, Elena Lazic.
Thank you. I didn't know you thought I was spooky.
Well,
I will take that as a compliment.
it is a compliment. It's, in twins, there's always a spooky one and a less spooky one. And I would say you're the spooky one, which is cool.
There's an interesting one and a boring one.
Yeah, those two things don't always go together, spooky and interesting, though. Anyway. And then, so today for this special episode, we've decided to talk not only about an actor and some of his performances or her performances, but instead to talk about 3 different horror performances because it's Halloween. But before we get into that, you are not spared from the classic "Tell me your journey" segment of this podcast. So please, Ellen, tell me your journey, since I have no idea what it is.
We just met. We actually haven't met. We just met online.
Yeah. On Twitter.
My journey so far, I guess I'm not going to start from the beginning. I think you just care about my job.
Exactly.
What I do as
in film, film related.
Yeah, in film. So very much like someone I know, yourself, I got into film criticism when at university I was writing a lot just on Letterboxd and on Twitter about movies I liked. And I wasn't very good at it, but that was my early days.
I wouldn't say that.
I've wanted to say things and maybe they didn't come out right, but the desire was there.
Exactly.
And then soon after that, some people started giving me chances to write for real places, for real outlets and magazines, and shout out to them. And through that, I eventually, I think, got better at writing. And this is still what I do now. And I love writing about films, and I also love writing about horror films because I feel like it's a endlessly and interesting genre, and that because of the pleasures at play, it's like sort of between highbrow and lowbrow, between like the really funny and the really serious. I find it especially interesting, and I think like it's often not, I mean, maybe not so now, but it used to be that horror wasn't really written about seriously, and so it's always fun and a nice challenge to write about it. So I try to do that as much as I can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why I picked you to be on here. It's not because I like you or whatever. It's mostly because of your credentials.
You had to pick me.
Yeah, sadly,
very reluctantly.
Yeah. And also, it just so happens that the films we decided to talk about, I mean, the performances within films that we decided to talk about, are performances where someone plays a serial killer. And that's also one reason why I picked you, is because you are interested in serial killers. And
big reveal on this podcast. I have killed people. No,
you haven't.
No, it's true. I do like. I think as I was saying, like horror is really interesting to write about, and films about serial killers are even more interesting to write about, whether they're about real serial killers or not. Because I feel like it's just it sounds really simple, but like the idea of a character that you follow in a movie doing these inhumane, unspeakable acts on another person for no reason, because the whole point of the serial killer is like, he's got psychological reasons, but there's no real motive. Like, he's not doing it for money or revenge or things like this. And I feel like that just makes for interesting films, but also especially for interesting audience responses. And so yeah, I've written quite a bit about films about serial killers, but it's not so much that I'm interested in true crime, the way that there's such a wave of true crime entertainment at the moment. I'm not really into that. I'm not really into all these shows about real horrible crimes because it's just not really interesting to me. What's interesting to me is the way we talk about serial killers and the way they are portrayed in film. So I've written quite a bit about that, including about one of the films we're talking about today. Which
is it the last one?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so yeah.
Which you are impersonating right now.
Indeed. So for those watching on YouTube, you might be wondering, why did she slack off today and just came in her robe? What the hell?
I'm not wondering.
Yeah,
I know you.
You know, because
you do that.
I don't do that.
Lazy.
The reason why I'm wearing a red robe is as a reference to one of the films we're going to discuss. And if you've seen it when it came out in 2018, you might know. If not, you'll find out very soon. So
I mean, you can probably find out in the name of the podcast episode.
Well, yeah. Good point.
But which one of the three? I mean, you don't know which one.
Exactly. Maybe they all have a red robe. Could be. That's why we picked them.
That would be amazing. I mean, I didn't try to find films where that happens, but there must be more than one.
Anyway, let's get going. So, like you were saying, and I totally agree with you, the thing with serial killer films is that, yes, they are horrific. It's horror genre. And let's not get, too crazy about what is horror, because if you're scared, I think it kind of counts, whatever. Whoever.
Unless you're scared of Paddington, then you need to.
Personal horror. Personal horror. It works. Anyway. So, and I think the three films we decided to talk about, they kind of explore the serial killer idea in slightly different ways, and they create the very different reactions in spectators, I think. And also they come from different eras where cinema was different, and therefore spectators were more or less used to stuff. So anyway, let's get more specific. The first film we decided to talk about is Fritz Lang's 1931 film called M. Do you like this film?
I do. Interestingly, it's really bad because I just said I love films about serial killers, but I had never seen that film in full before this podcast. But I had studied, obviously, the opening sequence in university, and it had made a huge impact on me.
I remember.
But it's one of those classic films, everybody has these classic films that they somehow never seen. So I don't feel that bad.
That's all right.
And yeah, I do love this film. I was kind of blown away by just how much of what it was doing for the first time. And these are tropes, and even beyond the idea of the crime film, just methods of using sound that are still used. Because what's really interesting is that, I mean, if you don't know that, it kind of, you don't even notice, but it's one of the it's the first sound film made by Fritz Lang, and there are so many techniques of sound that he uses in the film that are now just commonplace, but at the time were revolutionary. Like, for example, using sound to indicate something off screen, or using sound to make the connection between two scenes set at a different time or different place. But when you're a contemporary viewer from today watching it, you barely notice because you're so used to that. I mean, It's done all the time.
Yeah.
But I was talking about the serial killer film. I was kind of surprised by just how, in a way, there are some ways in which that film is actually more nuanced about serial killers than so many films now. So I guess we should say the main story. I mean, it's not very complicated, but it's the story of this guy who's a serial killer who kills children. And at the beginning of the film, the city, I think is it Berlin? I think it's in Germany.
I'm not sure.
But the city is in panic because there are several kids who have been kidnapped and then killed and found. We don't really know in what condition, but they're dead, and it's really horrific. And the killer is this guy, played by Peter Lorre. And then the whole movie is both the cops and the criminal underworld trying to find and arrest this man because he's ruining it for everybody else. Even for the criminals, because the cops are everywhere, so they can't do their business.
Yeah. I really like that aspect of the film, that it shows. It's very creepy because it shows that, when there's a real cause for problem, people coming together can happen, and that's cool. It's like, oh, even the criminals can get involved and like organized and for the greater good, but ultimately it is really just for themselves, and it creates this terrifying mob mentality. And like you said, the film is super nuanced because it treats the serial killer played by Peter Lorre in this very ambiguous way. where you both see the results of his criminal acts, obviously, which is terrifying.
Well, you don't.
Well, you don't see, but
you don't know what happens to the kids, but you see like the panic surrounding what he's doing.
And also you see him as he's about to kidnap a child, and in moments when he's trying to escape the people who are trying to catch him. And because we see him in all these situations, we end up having a very complex picture of him. And not to go too far ahead, but the final scenes when he gets to actually talk about his compulsions makes that even more complex, because he's actually he's made into a human being in that scene. But yeah,
exactly. So that's what I meant by how modern it is and nuanced, because the way, first of all, the fact that we don't even see what he's doing, we don't see what he does to these bodies, but it's still terrifying. That's already quite modern, not to show things and let the audience think about it. And it's interesting how, if you watch like the story of cinema, and especially serial killer films, like how that sort of, it feels like there's waves of like, either you show things or you don't show things, or you show too much or you show nothing. And it's like, it's interesting how this is like a variant that still exists. But I read that at the time when Fritz Lang announced that he was going to make a film about a serial killer who kills children, before he'd even made the film. He made an announcement in a newspaper. Before the film was even made, there were people calling for it not to be made because it was too shocking. And it's just amazing to imagine that now, like that there will be such a reaction to a film that's not even made. But sometimes it does feel like we might be close to that. But it's just interesting how what's shocking and what's not shocking, he was already playing with the way people think of those things. So that's what I think is really interesting about the serial killer film. Even if it's a fictional serial killer, like it always elicits something almost like a very personal response in people, because it feels, because the murder is not based on anything. It has the sense that the killer can hit anyone at any time.
Exactly.
And he hits children who are even more innocent and have no idea. I mean, they haven't done anything, they're children. So I just like the way this film really plays with all the basics of the serial killer film, which is that primal fear of someone for no reason attacking you, and the most vulnerable.
Yeah. And I think what you said about how the serial killer film says something about us, I think you can also see that in the way the actor will play the serial killer. You see, because an actor having to play a serial killer, he comes from a place of, being a moderately healthy person. And he has to play someone who has problems. And obviously there's films where that's played terribly and they look like maniacs, and that's part of the game. Like, I mean, if you watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's not really like, you don't get a look at his psychology as much, but it's effective. It's more of a visceral, violent thing. But if you watch M, there's a real attempt to explore a bit of that through Peter Lorre's performance. So that's also why I really like films about criminals and serial killers, is because the actor has to put themselves in some very uncomfortable shoes, or in a way very comfortable, because it's very unusual and it's super fun. You get to do stuff you never do in regular roles. And I think the way Peter Lorre does it is really fun, because I think one of the first times we see him, when I was watching the film, and I had seen it before, I think, but I hadn't seen it in a long time, he looks a bit cartoonish, because Peter Lorre has a really weird face. Like, he's got these massive bulging eyes that he can move his face so much. And there's a scene where he looks at a child through a window, I think, and then the child goes away and he moves like, and he's like, chill out, dude. Like, he's rolling his eyes, and at first that makes you think the film is going to be kind of, cliche. But as it goes on and you see more and more of him, and you see more and more of him behaving and doing normal things, like walking around and ordering a cafe or whatever, you see that there's a real person there, and I think Peter Lorre has reconciled these things perfectly in his performance.
I agree. And actually, like the moment you describe where he sees this child, but then the child, I think what happens is that the child goes away with his mother and he's really frustrated. Or actually he's just looking in a window where there's lots of knives, and then he sees that child, and then he has the bulging eyes, and I found that moment maybe a bit cartoonish, but for me it was more insanely creepy, because before that you just have what people think and hear about this person. They don't even know who he is, and you just see him walk with that child and buy the balloon at the beginning, and that's, you don't really see anything weird. And this is the first moment where he does something that's really, really creepy, and it's really disgusting, because he has the, what you say, it almost looks like he's having like an orgasm.
I know.
And also he puts his hand on his lips, like it's so, I found that so explicit and shocking. This is from made in 1931, but I think, like, in a way you're right, it's not subtle, but that just makes it so much more shocking to me, because he can't, it's just so clearly sexual and horrible and just gross. But what you say about the theatricality of the performance is interesting, because I was reading about Peter Lorre, and he started as a stage actor. He was born in Hungary, but he was on stage in Vienna, in Austria, and then in Germany. And I feel like he brings some of that theatricality with him to the role when he plays this character. But in a way, you're right, that feels almost cartoonish because of the exaggerated nature of his acting. But at the same time, like, because he's playing such a crazy character, it's, in a way, it just makes it more, I don't know, it just sort of, I mean, it's like the most basic definition of acting, but it's like he's suggesting all the turmoil in his head with this crazy outsized performance. But in what he does is in, you're right, it's in such small touches, and it's just when he sees that child, and then the rest of the time there's so many moments in the film where it's just him alone, and we're observing him, like, very voyeuristically. There's that scene, you're right, after the child is gone with its mother, and he's very disappointed. We see Peter Lorre go to a cafe and order whiskey, I think, or cognac. And we see him, I love it, but Fritz Lang decided to film him through this grapevine, or this, like, sort of bush on the side of the thing. And it's like, we're really like voyeurs looking at him. And you're right, in this moment, he looks almost normal. He's not exaggerating the disappointment. He's just sort of like, it's almost like he's shut off. He's like closed down. And he's just having this drink and looking sad. And you're right, he's got these sleepy eyes, bulging eyes, but he just gets, and he's got these very soft features. So you're right, it's like he can go to 11 in like a moment, but it feels part of the same character.
In that same scene, he's basically extremely frustrated by what happened, that he couldn't get the child. And he drinks, but then he also starts whistling. And it feels like the whistling is a way for him to like soothe himself, but it's not working, and he's extremely frustrated. And then he ends up being like this or something. And it's such an old movie thing. The scene near the end when he gets caught by all the criminals and he's trapped. They show him what he's done. They show him pictures. They ask him directly, "Why did you kill this child?" and stuff. And it's the first time anyone like has caught him. And he reacts like, at some point he bites his fist, it's like, and he's like, nobody does this. But then he counterbalances that with the moment later when he has that speech where he explains that he can't help himself. And I think in that moment you can see that Peter Lorre was, as much as he was a theater guy, and as much as, sound film was very new, he perfectly translates to sound cinema. Because he brings all that he has, which is an extreme physicality, which is also great expressions, and a great strength with his voice. I mean, there's moments when he screams in that scene. He keeps screaming, "I can't help it." And I don't speak German, but like it sounds very good, and it's screeching. Like in the cinema of today, it's rare for people to let themselves go that far in a scene like this. And I think he's wonderful. And
actually,
I felt
what
for
you
him.
say about the moment where he bites his fist, and the exaggerated way he moves in this moment, I actually really reminded me when I rewatched Psycho, and the way Anthony Perkins plays his character in Psycho. I think it's quite similar. The sort of exaggerated moments of, but it's always these moments of like panic and anxiety where they have these like almost involuntary bodily movements that are unusual for the time. Even though like so many actors in M have this very old type of acting where they're very expressive, it's always expressive, but in a very measured way, in a very like intentional way. And I feel like the way Peter Lorre, when he bites his fist and when he's like shaking and screaming, and his face, the movement of his face, like this, it's so malleable. Like he can just change expression in like 1 second.
Yeah.
Obviously it's controlled because he's an actor and he knows what he's doing, but there's a sense of something overflowing, you know, like he's like sort of losing control. And I feel like that feels so modern as well at the time. And I felt like that was very similar to what Anthony Perkins does in Psycho.
I totally agree. I think this is the opportunity to talk about Psycho now. I think actually Anthony Perkins has a very similar ability to completely change his face. And also it's because Hitchcock chose to write the screenplay and cast someone who's actually kind of handsome and tall and skinny. And I think in the novel on which the film Psycho is based on, the guy is characterized as like fat, small, and completely unnoticeable and not interesting. But I think Anthony Perkins, with his boyish look and behavior, and at the same time his amazing acting and just like malleability, like you say, he translates the creepiness in a slightly different way from Laurie, but also it shares that extreme, that ability to go to extremes. And I think in Psycho, what's really cool is that he's so charming, and he's so effortlessly charming. And I think in the entire film, Perkins' performance is the most modern, effortless one. And yet he plays a serial killer. So it kind of completely goes against your expectations, I guess, when you watch it.
Yeah, I think something actually that another connection, but it ties up to all of this, between, I think, M and Psycho is what really struck me in Psycho when I rewatched it yesterday was just how much of the film is people being alone. And literally, there's barely any dialogue for so many scenes, like Janet Leigh being alone for ages at the beginning. Obviously, the first scene is interesting because it starts with this scene of intimacy, very close intimacy, almost like I think Hitchcock had to reshoot it because it was too intimate or something to make it less erotic. But it starts with this scene of intimacy, of people who want to be together but can't be together. And then we follow Janet Leigh for so long alone, on the road, in these stranger places, and feeling paranoid because she's stole this money and this cop is following her. But then there's also, you're right, and like the character played by Anthony Perkins, Norman Bates.
What's his name?
He's also alone. I mean, obviously there's no spoilers on this podcast, it's fine, but obviously we think he's got his mother, but
he's never really alone in there.
Well, yeah.
Anyway.
But he's also very alone. But it's what's interesting, as you say, is that he can be very charming. But what I feel like almost the film is full of these characters struggling with their loneliness, especially the Janet Leigh character. And then you've got this guy who almost found a way to deal with his loneliness, which is to pretend that his mom is still around, but also to adapt to whatever anyone he meets requires him to do. So when he first meets Janet Leigh, he's almost childish. I was really surprised by how he looks he almost looks younger than he is. I think he's not even 30 in the film, which is amazing. He's so young.
He was 28. 28
yeah, exactly. But he almost seems like a child when he meets her, and he's like making her a sandwich and being like, oh, I'm all alone here, but you know what? It's just being so nice but almost childish, very much playing like he's younger than her, and like she's like this superior, really great woman, a dame almost. But then as soon as she leaves, he drops the act and he becomes very cynical and sardonic and unpleasant. But then when he meets that detective later on, he's also, again, completely different. He doesn't act innocent. He just acts like a good business owner. Who's like, I've got this business in place. I know what I'm doing. No one came here. Oh, yeah, you want to ask me a question? Like, almost like he's, the way men do when they act like they're buddies when they don't know each other.
I love that scene.
And then when he meets again someone else, who is it? I think it's maybe the boyfriend.
Yeah, the boyfriend and the sister, I think.
Yeah, he again acts differently.
I know this is the same
more
thing.
like cold and detached. He acts like he doesn't want to engage at all with them because he's there. He knows that they're they're not who they say they are and that they're looking for something.
Yeah.
But I just find like the way that in M as well, there was all this idea of loneliness and seeing Peter Lorre alone in the street and looking, you know, dropping the act completely and being just on his own. And the way the film insists on those moments felt really modern. But then you see that again in Psycho, in this even more anxious. It's such an unpleasant film, Psycho, because of that, I think, at the beginning, because you just have this woman alone. I mean, she's framed like she's in danger all the time, and she is. But also, I think, for the loneliness. And I feel like, I mean, you don't need to be a sociologist to say like serial killers are born out of the possibility of being alone in these big cities, you know, being surrounded by people all the time, but being completely alone and not having any connections, and how alienating that is, and like how the serial killer is a consequence of that. I think there are some serial killers in the countryside, but it's like way less of a thing.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, so, I exactly had the same reaction when we were watching Psycho. Alessandro hadn't seen it before, and he kept being like, this is so tense, and also it's because nothing really happens for so long.
God.
And
it's so horrible. Like, honestly, I mean, it's an amazing movie, but like I don't enjoy. I almost don't enjoy watching it because it's so. I remember it so well from when we watched it at uni. I think it was just so creepy, and before even the murder happens, you don't even need the murder. Like, the murder is horrible. Like, one of the most disgusting things I've seen. But even before that, just how much time, how she's alone and everything looks a bit shit. Like, the landscape is so sad and depressing, and like all these buildings, and everyone looks like they're so stuffy in their clothes, and like the makeup, and it's just a nightmare. It's honestly like she's already doomed. Like, her life sucks. Like, it's horrible.
And to go back to Perkins, I exactly had the same reaction as well. He completely adapts to whoever he's speaking to. And like you said, I really like the scene when he talks to the private detective, because he's kind of struggling to find the act because he's lying, and he keeps making mistakes as well. He keeps saying, oh no, nobody came. And then the guy looks at the register, he's like, well, somebody came. He's like, oh yeah, I remember now. Like, it's just the whole idea of him keeping an act, but at the same time having to lie and trying to look boyish, but not so boyish that the guy doesn't have respect for him. And also trying to look like a good business owner, but also someone who's like, oh, you know, nobody comes here anyway. He seems to be struggling so much. And yet, he works out, sort of, for that, as far as that goes. And I think to find an actor who could adapt to each of those moments in such dramatically different ways must have been very difficult. And I'm so glad Perkins was chosen, because he brings something so magical to it, so special.
He feels so modern, like, compared to every other actor in the film. Like, Janet Leigh is amazing, but her style of acting is very similar to the style of acting, I think, of the boyfriend, you know, the lover, and the sister, Vera Miles, in that it's so still and controlled, and very much like, I wait for my turn to say what I have to say. And very like, it's decided that these people have things going on inside, but they don't show, like, they seem to be in perfect alignment with who they are inside. Whereas obviously he's a lying serial killer, so he's not in alignment with what's going on inside.
Not exactly.
But it feels so modern, because it's like, I mean, no one is in alignment with what's going on inside. Like, this is why acting has changed since, I think, the time. I mean, I can't even imagine how shocking Psycho must have been at the time, because it was... because it's horrible and it's a murder and things, but also because I think this idea that we'll go a little mad sometimes, which is
no, totally.
I have to say, but you know, it's like really much like, it's like he's right. Everyone does. You would hope everyone does. It's almost like there's a sense to me where he's almost reassuring this character, because he's the more human one. You know, I mean, that sounds really sick, but that's what I mean. You know, like, he knows that he's not in control of everything, whereas all these people, they act as if they're in control, especially the lover. There's the scene where he's confronting him and asking him questions, and he's got his hand,
I know,
the lover has got his hand on the table, and he's not even moving his hand. He's saying, I don't know what he's saying, but he's saying like,
confrontational
someone
stuff
here at this hotel or whatever, and he's not moving, and I'm like, how is that possible?
I read
like,
that
you're not human. Like, how does your emotion not take over you a little bit, you know?
Yeah, I read that Hitchcock actually hated that performance, and he called the actor the stiff, like during the whole shoot or something.
Well, he had a point.
Yeah, he wanted.
I feel like it sort of gives it makes sense with the movie, but it just really makes Anthony Perkins look great.
Yeah, exactly. It's good for him, but for the film itself, it makes it look like this is the least invested boyfriend I've ever seen. Like I love the scene when
I literally thought he was, because I hadn't seen the film in a while, and I thought this character was just in the opening scene and never returned, and actually he's like quite important.
You were hoping
because he's so boring. Yeah.
Yeah, like you were saying, this is a very difficult watch, and I saw yesterday you posted or something a picture of a Hitchcock quote where he said something like, "You have to make the audience suffer as much as possible," and this is clearly present in his films, like no doubt about it. But I like the idea that this is also something that Lars von Trier would say. And this takes us to the third film we've decided to talk about, which is The House That Jack Built. And this explains this attire. So, and
you have to put it on now.
But it's really hot.
Just for a bit.
Okay, just for a bit. I do not have Bruno Ganz near me or Verge or anyone, but that's fine.
Are you sure?
Not yet.
Have you checked in your fridge?
My freezer is really small, unless it's that. So yeah. I've never heard voices.
So should we just say what the story is very quickly?
So yeah, tell us about the story of The House That Jack Built.
For those who haven't seen this film,
please watch it.
I'm gonna. It's not really. It's almost not a brag because everyone should be allowed to brag about that. But I saw it in Cannes. I think it was 8:30 a.m. in the morning.
I think so, yeah.
And it was so great, and it was just the idea of having this very violent, sometimes quite shocking, provocative film in Cannes, which I know Cannes is not actually a land of non-provocation, but it was just thrilling to be part of one of those Cannes experiences where they play some of the deranged things that people talk about for years.
Especially at 9 a.m. That was really special.
The best way to see it.
Just like barely awake, with a coffee really hot that burnt your tongue and a croissant in your stomach. It's just the best. I remember that. So yeah.
And so the story is it's about a serial killer called Jack. But interestingly, it's throughout the film, it's narrated by him, and it's him telling his story. Talking to a character called Verge, played by Bruno Ganz. But at the beginning, we don't know who he is. We don't know where he's talking from. We just hear the voiceover. And we go through, I think, 4 or 5 incidents.
I think 5. I believe
5. And these are the incidents that he picked that are moments in his evolution as a serial killer. But in telling these incidents, which are incidents where he killed people, or almost kill people, try to kill people. He's also telling his life story and his philosophy and his beliefs. And the character is played by Matt Dillon, who is a legend. And it's a very interesting film because it's absolutely horrific. Like some of the violence, the violence itself, like the gore is upsetting, but what's more upsetting is just the suspense of the scenes and like staying with this character.
The setups are very...
The setups like the situations, are very upsetting.
The situations are like absolute nightmare situations, and I can't believe how von Trier could think of so many horrific situations. Just like very simple things, like a girl stuck in a house with her boyfriend who turns out to be really creepy, and the way that plays out, the way he gets the keys, everything is just like, it's brilliantly set up. And like any von Trier film, it is brilliantly set up. There's always a smart situation thinking going on. But yeah, carry on.
But what's really amazing, and this is, I think it was the 3rd or 4th time I was watching the film, and the more I watch it, the more I love it. It's never boring, even though it's 2 hours 30 or 40 minutes long. It's quite long. It never feels long. And the more I watch it, the more I wonder how anyone cannot like this film, because it's just a complete delight. Because on top, or in addition, or in combination with being disgusting and quite upsetting, it's also absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
because it takes the idea of the serial killer as this, tortured soul, and turns it inside out and shows how ridiculous and just arrogant and self-centered these types of people tend to be.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, in a way, the house that Jack built presents the serial killer's mind from the serial killer himself. And it's a serial killer that is not... Because the way we talk about psychopaths usually is that they have a sort of narcissism problem. And this is really what Jack has. I mean, he just finds justifications and explanations for everything he does, even the most horrific things. Whereas when you look at Psycho, the explanation is like weird and, it's like a split personality thing. But when you look at M, it's a guy who's aware of the problem but can't help himself and has moments like when he kills, he forgets what he's done. So it's quite a different perspective, and in a way it's more humane. Whereas Jack is kind of like you were saying, it's like kind of taking the piss, but it's also very realistic for that reason, because I think when you hear interviews of actual serial killers, they are very confident and they don't have remorse. They have a clear idea of why they do things most of the time. And I think for Lars von Trier to choose that very problematic perspective to tell the story of a serial killer is extremely funny and extremely revealing, because obviously is ridiculous. Like, obviously you don't take what this dude says. I mean, he's a serial killer. What does he know about art and like politics and history? Like, I don't care what a serial killer has to say about this as much.
Exactly.
I mean, I care, but like only as far as it's interestingly silly. And
yeah, it's interesting actually, because it's like almost like M was the idea that, there's nothing interesting, he's just sick.
Right.
He's just sick and he needs to go to be treated, or there might not be... I love the ending of M because there's no solution found. The only solution is be careful where you leave your children. Like, we can't do anything about the fact that there are psychopaths who might kill them. Like, just look after your children.
You just
That's
have
it.
to catch them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's sick. He can't do anything about it. Psycho is more like psychoanalytical. Like, some things happen to him and he does these things and he can't help. He it's the same way he sort of can't help himself and he needs help. I mean, obviously that's very ambiguous, because at the end when he looks at the camera, Bates looks at the camera, he's got this inner monologue where he says he's his mom, and she's saying, I wouldn't hurt a fly. Look, we're just not going to touch this fly on my hand. And like, and it looks like he you don't know if he's actually if he really thinks he's his mother, or if he's saying that as an excuse. So there's quite an ambiguity there.
Yeah.
But it's still the idea that it's like interesting. Like, what does he think really? Who's inside really?
Mm-hmm.
And Jack, in the house that Jack built, is like sort of playing with the idea that it's interesting, whatever is going on in a serial killer's mind, because it's like, no, it's not interesting. Like, he's just so self-involved, and like he makes all these like
parallels,
leaps in his mind, and like logical leaps in his mind that like don't really work, but he thinks they work because he's only talking ever to himself. Like, he's got this complete inability to relate to anyone, so it's not like any one argument could like impact what he has to say and make him think differently. So he's in this constant self-involved loop. And I love that we've reached a point where we can make a film about how boring and not original a serial killer is, because I just love the evolution of that, because the film plays with the appeal. I mean, Jack is such an appealing character, and when he talks about art and things, that you listen, because he's very compelling in the way he tells things. But every time he reaches this conclusion, it's like, what? Like, there's something wrong there. Like, why you like?
Yeah.
This is very like smart and looks really pretty when he talks, and it sounds grand, but it's actually quite like, if you've got basic human decency, it's very wrong. Yeah. And he goes really far with this idea, Lars von Trier, to, I think, very necessarily, because he can't make this film about this kind of narcissistic stupidity without going so far, because I think it would be easy. But some people obviously were really shocked by it, but like, that's a Lars von Trier film. But I just love it because there's been, if you look at the history of the serial killer film, like especially in there's been quite a few films for, I mean, at least 1931, but if you look at like the 90s, there were all these waves of commercial American movies about serial killers that try to make them sound like smart or like deranged, but like fascinating,
like The Silence,
and like super intelligent as well, which is like
The Silence of the Lambs and stuff like that.
Why people want to believe that serial killers are intelligent is just there's this description on IMDb of Jack was like a highly intelligent serial killer. I'm like, maybe. I mean, it depends what you call intelligence, you know. But there were all these films like Seven, Silence of the Lambs, Zodiac. Well, not really Zodiac, but loads of films like The Bone Collector about these serial killers who had like maniacal plans and like ways of seeing the world that were like terrifying but kind of true or something. And it was just, if you read about any real serial killer, this is not, I mean, they might think they're smart, but they really not smart. They start to all sound the same very quickly. And I feel like Jack is is like one of the most, while being completely fictional, is one of the most like accurate descriptions of this state of mind that's so interesting about serial killers.
And I think casting Matt Dillon in that role is brilliant because he's got that face where he's handsome. Obviously he was a heartthrob in like the 90s, which like I mean I wasn't really watching this film, so to me he's Jack now, so sorry Matt. But he's also got this not to be rude, but like he's got a very strong forehead and he looks kind of like an ape sometimes. And so he looks a bit dumb. He looks a bit...
Yeah, he can look a bit stupid. Yeah, you're right.
He looks a bit like... When he's serious, he looks like a serious child, you know? He looks like he's very like, oh, I'm frustrated and I'm doing my thing. And it's so compelling to watch because, like we were saying earlier, serial killer films are brilliant because you see people alone. Also in the sense that you see the serial killer alone doing his business, like cleaning, or, you know, doing physical things. And so much of the humor in The House That Jack Built is because Jack has OCD and he's obsessed with cleaning his crime scenes like through so thoroughly that he almost gets caught all the time. And I think Matt Dillon is just brilliant at just doing the basic stuff of cleaning and moving around and stressing out about, have I cleaned under the carpet? It's just his performance.
Yeah, I think what's really funny in that scene is the contrast between the turmoil that the character is in, and which Matt Dillon shows on his face. He's like, oh, you know, he's like in the car, like hitting things, like, no, I have to check again for the 4th time whether there's any blood left on this crime scene. And the way it's shot by Lars von Trier with all these jump cuts, that just, it's almost like, I mean, it's like The Office or something, you know, it's like the contrast between what the turmoil of the character and how he looks from the outside. And obviously that's the serial killer is perfect for this because it's like inside he thinks he's so interesting and it's got all these demons and things going on, but from the outside he's just a guy. And the whole movie is like this. And I think you're right about Matt Dillon's face. It's like he can look, I don't think so much that he necessarily looks stupid, but I think he's got this thing. If you watch any film he's been in, because I had a thing where I watched quite a few films he was in. I watched Rumblefish.
You had a thing. I like how you call that.
Went through a phase. No, but like in like the space of 2 days, I watched like 2 or 3 Matt Dillon films. But there was for example, Rumblefish, or I forget what the other one's called, by Coppola. But he's got this thing where when he says his lines, any line that he's saying, you can never know if he's being sincere completely. There's also this really awful Cameron Crowe film, Singles, in which he plays punk band like guitar guy.
Amazing.
And he's got this really long hair and he looks awful. It's amazing. But so it's like a comic character, and he plays very much with like, is he serious? Like, does he mean what he's saying? Is he? And there's always this sense, like, as serious as he can be, there's a sense he's a bit mischievous. And he's a bit like tongue-in-cheek when he says things. And obviously for the character of Jack in The House That Jack Built, that's like amazing, because it's like it's the same, like when he's lying to people, or when he's pretending to have emotions, or there's always the sense that he's like taking the piss a little bit. I feel like I think Matt Dillon is just completely underrated, and he needs to be, people need to really pay attention more to what he does, because it's amazing. And there's a reason why he's in the film Wild Things, in which he also plays a duplicitous character, who seems very serious and very concerned, and he's like, oh no, what's going on? And then you're like, that's all an act. And he's actually like, you're right, if he lowers his eyebrows, he looks sort of blasé, just like, I'm this is stupid. And then he can have this really large smile, and he's like, oh, I got you. And it's like, that's his face is always doing this. But what I really like as well about Jack is that, so he does this the whole film, and it's just a complete joy to watch him. Like, there's this scene where he talks about how he got this fridge that he bought from a guy that had loads of pizza in it, but he never managed to sell the pizzas. So there's loads of pizzas and then corpses that he keeps in the fridge. And there's this literally 1 second moment where we see Matt Dillon turn around, looking at all the pizzas, be like, and he's like annoyed at all the pizzas, and it's really funny. Because it's like he's like trying to get rid of a body, and meanwhile I was like, these fucking pizzas, and like Matt Dillon can make this so real, but at the same time it all, so it's really funny. I mean, I could watch this for like hours. Like, I think Matt Dillon is just amazing face and amazing actor, and he just plays with you so well. So that's why I think it's so suited to Lars von Trier's like jump cut style. But then you have this moment near the end of the film, the one moment of sincerity in the entire film, where he's looking at the Elysian fields on his way to hell, and he hears, I think he calls it the breath of the
meadow.
Field.
Of the meadow.
Of the meadow, which is what he heard as a child, which is what when the men were cutting the grass, they would breathe like
all at the same time.
Yes, at the same time, and he loved that. And they walk past the Elysian fields, and Verge, Gant says, we can't go here, we don't have access here, obviously because we're going to hell. And this is the only moment in the film where Jack, his expression looks sincere, where he's not acting up human emotions, and he's just looking there, and obviously still Matt Dillon, still the same face, but he starts to have tears in his eyes. And it's really hard, because like, I don't know how he does it to make it sound, make it look sincere, but he really does, because I think he's got this face where he can just drop everything and look so direct. He just seems like he's like an actor who can act and be like sort of a bit of a clown, but then he can easily drop everything and let his features hang and just look so present and so direct, and not like he's acting anything. There are actors who are always doing something with their face, like squinting or something, and he can just do nothing, and he just looks so present and direct. And he's also got this really great deep voice that really makes him feel more real, and sort of counterbalances just how much of a clown he can be.
I think you're totally right.
All these amazing elements of Matt Dillon that just make him, I think, like one of the most interesting and fascinating actors to watch. Like, there's just so much to play with there, and I feel like Lars von Trier really played with all the tools in Matt Dillon. I
think what makes him so direct, like you say, like the way he talks, the way he can drop everything, like you say, I think he's kind of always doing that. And when I watch him, it strikes me that his line deliveries, the way he talks, obviously when he's like lying to someone, he's doing something, when he's trying to get into the house of the woman that he strangles like terribly. He has to strangle her like 3 times.
He's really bad at strangling.
He's like, he doesn't know how to do it at that point. When he tries to get in the house and he's failing because she's like, who is this man? He talks, he changes registers, he tries to be friendly, he tries to be scary, he tries to be disappointed. Not scary, but more like scared or whatever. He changes registers so many times. But I think the reason why Matt Dillon can do that and seem between sincere and not sincere is because he understands that in life, this is how we sound. When are you ever 100% confident in what you're saying? This is rare. Most of the time, we're just trying. That's acting is trying. And, it's like being, what they always say is like, you're scared, but you have to do it anyway. Before you go on stage, you're like, I don't know what the fuck I'm going to do, but you have to do it. And that's the playing. That's the play. Boom. And I think that's what he does. He gets a line that says something like, you know what? I was playing with you. I'm not a police officer. When like he's been trying to tell her he's a policeman for like 15 minutes. He says that. So he just takes the line and says it. And because it's such a silly line, he looks silly. Like he doesn't need to do more, and he understands that. And I think you're right. Most actors, they feel like they need to put something on. They feel they need to bring out the emotion. And in that scene with the Elysian fields, he's just looking at the Elysian Fields and seeing that this is the happiness he's known, and he's never going to see it again, and boom, he cries. That's it. There's a real sincerity.
He doesn't say anything. You're right. He's just there feeling the thing.
Yeah.
But you're right about what you say about how he knows that when we say things, like we're never 100% sure that they're gonna sound sincere. And I think that's actually really key to what he does in this film, The Outsiders, where he's quite young. And it's all a film about like young boys, like teenagers. And they think their lives are like really important, and they have all these things going on. And so whenever they say
just
things,
like serial killers.
it's like it's a bit, they're teens, they're young, and he really I feel like almost like that's what he's doing still now, like because he says things and he knows like, well, I'm taking a chance whenever I say anything. Like I don't know if these people are going to believe me, and it's hard to translate all that's going on in my mind in just one sentence that sounds sincere.
Yeah,
and he's like, it almost feels like when you watch young actors playing really young people saying things that are like big statements about life, it's like, oh, there's a truth in there, but it's also quite sweet and funny.
Yeah.
So he's just a master at doing this.
Yeah. And I think in a way, maybe Anthony Perkins had a similar kind of energy to him. He, he could play confidence, but I think in the scene, for instance, like I was saying with the detective, he kind of plays that too. He's silly, and like the interaction he has with that guy, he kind of socializes the detective to be more like fatherly to him progressively. And at some point, the detective asks him something. And he's like, and Perkins replies like, just no. Like he just shakes his head, and he's just so awkward and young. And I think you're right. It's like this quality of just saying the lines and being completely uncertain. And when you're a serial killer, I'm sure when you get interrogated, that's what happens probably. So that feels very real.
I mean, there's a sense. I mean, in the House at Jack Bell, there's also there's this moment where Bruno Ganz talks about this great rain that washed away the blood that led to his taking the body of this second victim, and they talk about how you love to get away with things, and about how when he was a kid running in the fields, he would hide, but he knew that the way he ran, the path where he had gone was very clear, and maybe there was a sense where he wanted to be caught. And I feel like it's the same when in The Delivery of Matt Dillon, where he's a bit cheeky and he's like, can you tell that I'm lying or that I'm not really serious? And it's almost like he loves to do that. He loves to push it to see how far he can go. And in the scene with that woman where he's pretending to be a police officer and then like an insurance guy, it's the same. He's like, he wants to see how far he can go and push it and like have fun with it. And it's really, I feel like, that's an amazing for a movie and stuff, whatever. But I feel like for the serial killer, it feels very much like something Ted Bundy would do, which we don't need to talk about Ted Bundy at length, like is a serial killer, whatever, you can read about on Wikipedia. But there was this thing where he would do his own defense, like he was always trying to do something outrageous and to get away with it because he was so arrogant and so narcissistic, and he thought he was better than everyone else. But he escaped from prison twice. So there's the sense that he loves to like be a bit edgy and push people and like go always a little bit farther than you would think, even when it means breaking his ankle. Like there's always this sense of loving the danger. And I feel like the Matt Dillon performance, where he's always trying to get away with more and more lies and insane theories about why what he's doing makes sense. It's like there's a sense where like, does he really believe this insane theory about that's why he kills people, because he's working through the material and letting the material, which is human bodies, tell him what to do, or is he trying to push our buttons? And I feel like that's where Matt Dillon is like the perfect actor to play this role.
And because of that, I think he's the perfect actor to be a sort of surrogate for Lars von Trier. I mean, I think it was when the film came out, I actually wrote a very long article about Lars von Trier, and I had an amazing couple weeks where I just watched all these films, and oh my god, it was delightful. Like, it doesn't sound like it would be, but it was so good. And in my view, the house that Jack built is the house that Lars built, because he's literally making a house out of human suffering. And the entire point is not that you know, suffering is cool. Let's just suffer. I love it. I'm a sadist. No, he's not a sadist. The whole point of Lars von Trier is that he says, I think at some point, Jack in the film, for him, heaven and hell are kind of the same. And they both are part of life. And I think he couldn't have done a better job of explaining that and of explaining how art is meant to also be horrible and beautiful as well. I don't think he could have done a better job of that if he had cast someone else than Matt Dillon, because I think Matt Dillon, like we've been saying, he has this duality of being extremely charming, extremely silly, extremely disturbing in a way. And I think throughout these films, there's been a kind of progression towards complexity. You know, even though M was extremely humane and, you know, like, oh, it's not his fault, sure, but you did take a guy who looks like Peter Lorre to play this killer. You know, you could have picked someone like Anthony Perkins who looks perfectly innocent. So at first, I feel like movies were kind of playing with, oh, pick someone who looks scary or pick someone who looks absolutely not scary. And then pick Matt Dillon, and you don't know what you are in for. You have to see what happens. And that feels like a brilliant progression. And I like every single one of those modes. I think they all have something to give. But I think all three of those performances are just, in the specific registers, they make you feel something for the character in different ways. And you're either terrified or you laugh, and often it's both. And that's the point, I think, of those films. Because we're not there to feel terrible. You know, I'm not watching serial killer films because I like to feel bad. You know, it's also interesting, and if it's just horrific, you're not going to watch it. So might as well laugh as well.
Depends. Could be.
Yeah.
Some of them are just horrific and they're still worth seeing.
I don't watch them. Well, I haven't seen them. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Any final words on these three delightful performances?
I would just like to give credit to Paul Reed, who helped us pick the films to talk about, because I think it's actually such a great trifecta of roles, marking like the progression of the character of the serial killer in film. But also I think as we talked about, it's just the way they're all playing with similar things, like the ability of the actor to look innocent but also like sketchy and suspicious. And I think actually Peter Lorre, I mean, I don't think he looks like a villain all the time. He's got this sort of childish look as well, that he looks almost like he doesn't look like he could really hurt someone.
No, I agree.
When you first see him, and it's like, it's sort of almost more horrible that he has, because it's like, how could someone who looks so innocent be so monstrous? And same for Anthony Perkins, who's very charming in a way that Matt Dillon is also very charming. So yeah, I think it's just it's interesting, I think, to talk about performance in horror cinema, because I feel like it's not often discussed, even in these films where, I mean, the acting of the leads are absolutely essential to the film. I just feel like in horror, like we tend to sometimes just not pay attention to performances because it's more about what happens and the effects and the suspense. And so it's interesting. I think it was cool to pick these films where it's so much centered on one person, and often they are very alone. Because Jack as well, I mean, Jack in the House that Jack Bill also spends a lot of time alone with his thoughts. I mean, there's the possibility that he's alone the whole time and not talking to anybody, because who is this guy? But yeah, I think it's just, yeah. I think like people should talk more about performance in horror. I know it's sort of, it happens a bit more with like recent films, maybe like, for example, in like Hereditary, or even also Midsommar and Us and those recent ones. But I feel like it's worth looking even at the more classical films to do that as well. I mean, I know like Hitchcock, obviously performances are essential to his films all the time. It's not that no one ever talked about Anthony Perkins, but I just feel like to talk about what they do with horror specifically is always illuminating in a way that other genres maybe not so.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, this is it for this special Halloween episode of You Gotta Act. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
This was brilliant. And you'll be back, I'm sure, at some point.
If you'll have me.
There are so many films about horrifying things, and, you know, you can also talk about nice things, but we'll see about that.
No,
Okay.
No, I don't want to.
Okay. Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of You Gotta Act. Find us on social media at You Gotta Act and let us know what you think. See you next time.